Imagine being alone in a place that is supposed to be safe. The walls of your dorm, the silence of a late-night classroom, or the quiet hallway of your school. But then something moves. You feel the weight of a body pressing down on your mattress while your roommate sleeps with her back turned. You hear footsteps in an empty building, slow and deliberate, echoing in the dark, until the sound shifts above you, someone crawling in the ceiling, watching. Or worse, you trust a man with an ID badge, only to realize too late that he is luring you to a car where others wait, ready to take you. These are not ghost stories. These are true accounts of students just like you, who discovered that the places meant to protect them could quickly turn into prisons of fear. Welcome to The Price Paid, where we expose the disturbing truths hidden in everyday life. Hit that subscribe button now, because once you hear these stories, you'll never walk through your school hallways the same way again. When I first left home for college, I imagined dorm life would be filled with late-night conversations, laughter echoing through the halls, and the freedom of living away from my parents for the first time. What I got instead was something that still sends chills down my spine every time I think about it. I grew up in a small town, not far from the college I attended. Because of money, I couldn't afford an apartment like most of the other students. The pandemic had scattered a lot of people away from campus anyway. So many dorms stood half empty. Still, I wanted the full college experience, so I stayed. On move-in day, I finally met my roommate in person. We'd exchanged a few texts after the school gave her my number, which I thought was a little strange. She came across as polite but distant, someone who didn't talk much, but gave off an air that she was better than others. At one point, she even told me that she had enjoyed a whole room to herself last semester, until you showed up. That comment alone left me unsettled. During the weekdays, she barely stayed in the room, spending most of her time at her boyfriend's dorm. I figured that would give me some peace. I told her that every Friday I'd drive back home for the weekend and return early Monday morning before classes started. She just nodded. It seemed like a simple arrangement, but after my very first weekend away, things began to change. I came back early Monday morning, exhausted, and collapsed onto my bed. The mattress was thick, almost like a cloud, and I felt myself drifting off when suddenly, the edge of the mattress dipped as though someone had leaned against it. At first, I thought I was half dreaming, too tired to process what was happening. Then, just as slowly as it had sunk, the bed lifted back up. I turned, scanning the room, and there she was, lying in her bed, her back turned to me, breathing steadily as though she was asleep. I shook it off. Maybe I had imagined it. The second weekend, it happened again, but worse. This time, when I lay down after coming back to campus, the entire side of the bed sank down as though someone had sat right next to me. My body froze. I could hear the springs adjusting, feel the pressure beside me, and then the sound of someone jumping off the high bed. My bed was so tall I needed a step stool, just to climb on. But when I finally gathered the courage to look, she was in her own bed, facing the wall, perfectly still. I told myself I must have been overtired, maybe even hallucinating. But deep inside, fear was growing. By the third week, I dreaded coming back. And sure enough, it escalated. That Monday, after lying down, I once again felt the bed indent. But this time, it wasn't just weight pressing down. A hand touched the back of my neckline, steady, deliberate. I cannot even describe the cold that ran through my body. I squeezed my eyes shut, terrified that if I moved, something worse would happen. After what felt like an eternity, the pressure lifted. Whoever it was got off my bed. When I finally dared to turn my head, she was in the same position as always, lying on her side, appearing to sleep. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone, ran out of the room, and called my mom. My mom reported it to the school, and thankfully, they allowed me to switch rooms. The administration asked if I wanted to involve the police, but what evidence did I really have? No cameras in the dorms, no witnesses, no bruises, just my word. I said no, but begged them not to assign her another roommate. After moving, I kept thinking back to the little details I'd brushed off. She once mentioned a previous roommate who didn't last long but never explained why. She also had a locked drawer filled with prescription bottles, claiming they were for a skin condition. Was that the truth? Or was something more disturbing going on? A few days later, she messaged me saying I had left a book and binder in the old room. I didn't want to go back, but I didn't want her to get suspicious either. My key still worked, so I went in when she wasn't there. Relief flooded me as I quickly grabbed my things. But as I turned to leave, there she was in the doorway. I never even heard the door unlock. She just stood there, staring, not saying a word. My pulse raced. I forced a smile, slipped past her, and walked away. But she called after me, asking where my new room was. I lied, saying it was on the first floor near the stairs. She kept pressing for details, asking which hall, what it was near, like she wanted to memorize it. I lied again and left as quickly as possible. I never saw her again. Even now, I don't know what the truth was. Maybe she was sleepwalking because of medication. Maybe she was testing how close she could get to me without waking me up. Or maybe, one night, she was gonna do something worse. My mom believed she might have been slowly escalating, seeing how far she could go before I reacted. All I know is that if I hadn't switched rooms, things might have ended differently. There are certain nights you never forget. For me, it was one in my final year of college, when an assignment forced me to stay later than I ever wanted. The project was monstrous. Statistics professor was infamous for loading us with work that felt like punishment rather than learning. My laptop was giving me issues, so I decided to head to the business building to use the computers. It was a choice I regret to this day. The business building wasn't exactly a place anyone liked to be after dark. It sat slightly apart from the rest of campus, 3 stories tall, its corridors always carrying a strange, sterile silence. The walls seemed to swallow sound rather than reflect it. That night, I swiped my student ID and stepped into the icy chill of the lobby. It was colder inside than out, and the smell of disinfectant chemicals hung heavy in the air. The janitors had already finished their rounds, which meant I was completely alone. I went up to the second-floor computer lab and settled in. At first, it wasn't too bad. The hum of the computer and the clatter of the keyboard kept me company. I told myself I'd leave before 1 in the morning, but around 11:30, the building reminded me why nobody likes staying late. The first sound was a door slamming shut somewhere down the hallway. It wasn't the front entrance. It came from deeper inside. I froze for a moment, but quickly convinced myself it was nothing, maybe a draft or some maintenance staff. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no reason anyone else should be there. Then came the footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The sound of shoes striking tile in an almost exaggerated way, echoing down the empty corridor outside the lab. My blood ran cold. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to hide. They wanted to be heard. I sat still, eyes fixed on the glowing computer screen, hoping the footsteps would pass by. Instead, they stopped right outside the door. The lab had a small, rectangular window in it. If I leaned back in my chair, I could have looked through, but I couldn't bring myself to move. My breath felt like it might give me away. Then the doorknob rattled. Hard. Not just once, but repeatedly, as though someone was determined to get inside. The lab doors locked automatically after a certain hour, and I had assumed that made me safe. But hearing the rattling, the insistent jiggling of metal, made me feel sick. After half a minute, the sound stopped. The footsteps moved away, slow again, fading into silence. My chest finally loosened as I debated what to do. My rational side begged me to pack up and leave. My stubborn side argued that maybe it was just another student pulling a prank. I wanted to believe that. I forced myself to focus back on the screen. But 10 minutes later, the sound returned, only this time. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was above me. The ceiling was the kind with flimsy white panels that you could push aside to reveal the pipes and wiring. That night, the panels creaked. I heard weight shifting across them. Not random settling, not the heating system. Actual movement. Crawling. Dragging. Directly above my head, I tilted my head back, staring at the ceiling, every nerve in my body tight. One panel shifted ever so slightly, the corner bending under pressure, as though someone was carefully lowering themselves through. That was enough. My survival instinct finally snapped me out of my paralysis. I ripped my flash drive out, shoved my notebook into my bag, and bolted for the door. The hallway felt like another world-long dim, with buzzing fluorescent lights casting flickering shadows. My footsteps echoed like gunshots as I hurried toward the stairwell. I refused to run outright, terrified that sprinting would draw attention, but I walked fast enough to nearly trip over myself. When I shoved open the stairwell door, I made the mistake of looking up. There, on the landing just 1 floor above, stood a man. He wasn't a student, he wasn't a professor. His clothes hung loose and torn, his face half shrouded in shadow. His mouth hung open unnaturally wide, twisted into a grin that made my skin crawl. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring down at me as if he'd been waiting. My heart launched into my throat. I bolted down the stairs, nearly stumbling, pushing through the door at the bottom with all the strength I had. The front entrance loomed ahead like salvation. My ID card beeped just in time for the lock to release, and I practically tore it open, sprinting across campus without looking back. I didn't stop until I was in my dorm, Door locked, back pressed against it as I struggled to breathe. The next morning, when daylight had dulled the memory into something that almost felt like a nightmare, I forced myself to go back. I had to submit my project, after all. Walking into the business building in the sun, it looked normal, ordinary. But when I entered the lab, my stomach dropped. 2 ceiling tiles were missing. One was directly above the computer I'd been working at. The other was in the corner of the room, exactly where I'd seen the panel shift. The realization hit like a punch. Someone had been crawling above me, watching me from the shadows, trying to get in when they couldn't through the door. I never stayed late in that building again. And to this day, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't looked up in time, if I hadn't run, if I had been just a little slower. High school is supposed to be awkward, stressful, and maybe even a little boring. What it is not supposed to be is terrifying. But when I was 16, during what should have been just another ordinary school day, I experienced something that still haunts me. It was the closest I have ever come to vanishing forever. My school was fairly new, modern looking, and split into 3 sections. 1/3 was for children with learning disabilities, another for a nursery, and the last third was the actual high school. Security was supposed to be solid. Every student and staff member had to wear a lanyard with an ID card, which not only showed your picture and name, but also acted as a key. Without scanning it, you couldn't pass through most doors beyond the foyer. On my first day, we were warned not to let anyone in who didn't belong. That rule was meant to keep us safe. 2 weeks into the semester, on only my second full day because I had been sick, I found out just how fragile that safety really was. It started with something simple. I needed to use the bathroom. After lunch, I had a geography class that lasted most of the day. I had drunk way too much juice and realized halfway through that I couldn't hold it any longer. Usually, bathroom breaks weren't allowed during class, but my teacher, clearly annoyed, let me go. The halls were deserted. During class hours, the entire building felt unnervingly empty. I walked through the cafeteria, a vast room with rows of silent tables, and then into another section of the building where the bathrooms were. After I was finished, I retraced my steps, expecting everything to be as quiet as before. But when I pushed through the doors back into the cafeteria, I wasn't alone. A man sat at one of the tables. He looked too old to be a student, so I figured he must have been a teacher or maybe a parent visiting. That alone wasn't strange. What startled me was when he suddenly said, "Hey." His voice made me jump, and I let out a little squeal, embarrassed. He chuckled and said, "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you." That laugh should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. I noticed he wore a lanyard. That calmed me at first. Only staff and students had them. But when I looked closer, the ID was flipped backward, so I couldn't see his picture or name. I thought nothing of it at the time, because plenty of kids wore theirs that way. But looking back, it was the first red flag. He asked me for help. "I need some work things out of my car. Do you mind coming with me for a second?" he said casually. Without thinking, I agreed. Why would I question a teacher? I followed him out of the cafeteria, through the foyer, and then outside. He made no attempt at small talk. His hands moved nervously, going from his pockets to clasping together, then back again. I was too shy to say much either. The walk to the parking lot was about 50 meters, but because of the bushes, you couldn't see it until you were almost there. He told me his car was the blue one at the far end. As we got closer, I noticed movement inside the back seat. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but as the car came into full view, I realized there were at least 2 men crouching in the back. My body froze. Before I could react, the back door swung open. One of the men scrambled out, while the man I had followed grabbed my arm tightly. He was big, tall, and strong. I am 5'2" and underweight. There was no way I should have been able to fight him off. But adrenaline is powerful. I yanked my arm with all the strength I had and managed to break free. I turned and ran. My legs carried me faster than I thought possible, back toward the school. I could hear multiple sets of heavy footsteps behind me, but then they stopped. Maybe they realized that chasing me all the way to the glass doors of the school was too risky. Those doors were automatic and transparent. Anyone passing by could have seen them. The moment the doors slid open, I bolted into the foyer and straight toward the attached cafe, where someone was working behind the counter. Gasping, panicked, I blurted out what had just happened. She calmed me down and took me directly to a teacher's office. My parents were called, and so were the police. Later, I found out the horrifying truth. The man hadn't been a teacher at all. He had gotten into the school because someone had dropped their lanyard outside. That was why his ID was flipped around to hide the fact that it wasn't his picture. Security cameras in the parking lot captured everything, and the men were arrested and charged with attempted kidnapping. I didn't go back to school for weeks. Even now, years later, I still see it in my head. The man's hand on my arm, the figures crouched in the back seat of that car, the terrifying moment I realized I had been walking willingly into a trap. Therapy helps, but the fear never fully goes away. If I hadn't noticed the movement in that car window, if I hadn't pulled free, I might not be here to tell this story. Schools are often painted as sanctuaries. Parents send their children there believing the walls will protect them, that teachers will watch over them, and that the worst thing they might face is a difficult exam or a cafeteria meal they do not like. But these three stories remind us of a darker truth. Schools and universities, despite their appearance of safety, can be places where fear grows unchecked. Take the dorm room story. On the surface, it was nothing more than two students sharing space, something millions of young people do every year. But the cracks showed quickly. A roommate who seemed polite on the outside but carried an unsettling energy beneath the surface. A locked drawer full of prescriptions. A series of experiences that blurred the line between dream and reality, pressing down on a bed, a hand on the back of the neck, all while the supposed roommate appeared to be asleep. Was it sleepwalking, a side effect of medication, or a darker urge waiting for the right moment to reveal itself? The fact that the victim had to flee the room in terror tells us everything we need to know. Safety was an illusion. The second story strips away the comfort of routine.
I did not want to go with him.
A student working late at night in a quiet building
scared.
should have been nothing more than a story about academic pressure. Instead, it became a nightmare of footsteps, rattling doors, and unseen figures crawling above ceiling tiles. The idea that someone had been watching, waiting, and possibly preparing to attack is terrifying enough. But what makes it worse is how ordinary the setting was. A computer lab, a hallway, a stairwell, all spaces designed for learning, yet they turned into arenas of fear. The presence of a stranger, someone who did not belong, dressed in rags, grinning in the shadows, reminds us that danger can slip into places we assume are protected. And then there is the third story, perhaps the most chilling because it removes any doubt about human intent. A 16-year-old girl, new to her school, tricked by a man who disguised himself with a stolen lanyard. He lured her toward a car where two accomplices waited, ready to force her inside. The only thing that saved her was a sudden realization and the strength to fight back. Cameras caught them, the law charged them, but the damage was already done. She learned too young that the world is filled with predators who will use trust, rules, and even school systems against you. What ties these three stories together is not just fear, but the revelation that environments we consider safe can become unsafe in seconds. Dorm rooms should be places of rest, not stages for sinister encounters. Libraries and classrooms should nurture knowledge, not echo with footsteps meant to terrify. Parking lots and hallways should connect one part of the school to another, not serve as traps where predators wait. It is not just about ghosts or monsters in these stories. There's something far more frightening here: the unpredictability of human behavior and the fragility of security systems. A roommate might carry hidden darkness. A stranger might enter a building meant for students. A lost lanyard could become the key to someone's nightmare. Psychologically, these stories also reveal another truth. Victims often question themselves before they act. The girl in the dorm thought maybe she was hallucinating. The student in the lab convinced himself it was just a prank. The teenager followed the man without hesitation because he seemed like a teacher. Fear does not always strike as a clear warning. It creeps in slowly, disguised as doubt. By the time reality hits, it can already be too late. But in each case, there was a moment of survival. Choosing to switch rooms, running before the figure in the stairwell moved, fighting free from a stranger's grip. These moments remind us that instincts matter. That gut feeling, the one we are often taught to ignore or downplay, might be the very thing that saves us. The darker side of schools is not a haunted hallway or a ghost story whispered at night. It is the fact that institutions built for education can become breeding grounds for danger when vigilance drops. Locked doors, ID systems, supervision, they are not infallible. Students are vulnerable, and predators know it. For parents, for teachers, and for students themselves, these stories should serve as a warning. Never assume safety just because a place is familiar. Pay attention to the little details, the odd behavior, the unusual sound in the dark. Protect your instincts, and never let politeness override caution. Because in the end, the scariest lessons are not found in textbooks. They are found in the moments when you realize that the world, even within the walls of a school, can turn against you without warning. And sometimes, the only thing standing between survival and tragedy is the split-second decision to run, to fight, or to trust your fear. When you listen to stories like these, it is tempting to dismiss them as exaggerations, as nightmares that could never happen to you. But these accounts are not fiction. They are not urban legends told in the dark. They are the lived experiences of real students who discovered how quickly normal life can unravel when safety is only an illusion. The young woman in the dorm thought she was going to enjoy the typical freshman experience, only to find herself questioning whether the person she shared her room with was silently testing the limits of how close she could get before causing harm. The young man who only wanted to finish his assignment walked straight into a game of psychological terror, with someone lurking above him, waiting for the right moment. And the 16-year-old girl trusted a man with a lanyard, only to realize he had a car full of accomplices waiting to take her away. Each of them stepped into a situation that seemed harmless at first, but within moments, the line between safety and danger was gone. What can we learn from this? The first lesson is that instincts matter. Too often, people dismiss the chill that runs down their spine, the uneasy feeling that something is wrong. Each victim in these stories felt that unease, whether it was the weight on a mattress, the sound of footsteps in an empty hall, or the odd behavior of a man hiding his ID. Their survival came from recognizing those feelings and acting on them before it was too late. Never ignore your instincts. They are there to protect you. The second lesson is that safety systems are never perfect. Keys, ID cards, locked doors, all of them can fail. Technology and rules create a sense of order, but predators look for ways around them. What keeps you truly safe is vigilance, awareness, and the willingness to act when something feels wrong. The third lesson is that danger rarely announces itself in full. It comes in small details. A roommate who never quite seems right. A sound that doesn't belong. A stranger who insists on help. If something feels out of place, it probably is. Taking those signals seriously can mean the difference between escaping and becoming trapped. And finally, these stories remind us that no environment is untouchable. Schools and universities may present themselves as safe havens, but the truth is, predators and dangers can exist anywhere. The only true defense is preparedness, awareness, and the courage to act when fear tells you to move. So as you leave tonight, remember these stories. Remember that the scariest things are not always ghosts or monsters, but the people who walk the same halls as you, hiding intentions you cannot see. Trust yourself, protect yourself, and never assume that familiar walls mean you are safe. If you want more true accounts like these, stories that expose the hidden dangers behind everyday life, make sure you subscribe to The Price Paid. Because the price of ignorance is too high, and sometimes survival depends on hearing the warning before it is too late.